My name is Ricardo Cagigal. I'm the natural resource specialist for this region for the Texas Parks and Wildlife State Parks. And I will talk to y'all a little bit of the wildlife habitat and conservation. So I don't know if y'all have seen the wildlife curriculum is fairly extensive. So I'm going to try to touch on as much as I can, as fast as I can. I did also do a presentation on wildlife this past Envirothon for the students. I do have that, so I will try to go through it just so that y'all get an idea of kind of what the students will like saw and might see. But yeah, I want to make this kind of like interactive. So if there's any questions, please feel free to stop me and we can talk about it, discuss it. A lot of these terms are maybe a little bit oversimplified in this presentation. So if y'all really want to go in depth into something, just let me know. Alrighty. So habitat and wildlife requirements. Habitat refers to the natural environment in which a species lives. What are the requirements in order to create this habitat? We need food, water, shelter, and space, right? Those are the four qualities that encompass that. Now, there is factors affecting habitat suitability, which include climate, vegetation, human activity, and resource availability. What does this mean, right? We know a lot of these factors themselves are kind of like not only self-dependent, but they interact with each other. If we have change of climate, of course, that is probably going to affect another factor, which is vegetation. With that change, we cannot have like maybe some of the other stuff that is required for a habitat, which could be shelter, food, human activity, resource availability. As we create, concrete jungles, we do reduce that availability of some of those resources. Sometimes we impound water, right? Creeks stop running. That means water's not available for habitats downstream, stuff like that. So just kind of like things that are separate but intermingled as well. So ecosystems, community, and population. An ecosystem includes all living organisms and their non-living environment. This means so we're including water, rivers, lakes, any type of like soils and stuff like that are also part of the ecosystem. Community is a group of interacting species in an area, and a population is a group of individuals of the same species in a specific area. Oh, I forgot to separate that one. And communities interact with abiotic factors to form ecosystems. So population refers to kind of like, all right, we have a herd of deer here. So that would be your population, right? It's going to be separate from a population that is might be the same species, but if it's across the county, different population. So population dynamics, these involve birth rates, mortality, age structure, sex ratios, mating systems, and for each population, there is limiting factors, which include food, water, and decimating factors such as disease, predation. All these factors influence population size, and of course, there is wildlife management strategies that also play a role into these population dynamics. Adaptations in for wildlife, there are traits that help organisms survive. So, well, they help them survive to each specific environment that they live in. These include anatomical. So we know bears have like thicker fur because they're in colder weather, right? While further south, if we can even see this in deer populations, they're they have an anatomical differences based on where they are. Deer up north, they're bigger bodied, try to like retain more heat, right? Deer down south, especially down in the Arizona area where there's a lot of drought, there's a lot of heat, they're smaller bodied, more antlered. Physiological, we're talking about different mechanisms that they could put into effect. So hibernation, we know a lot of rodents, bears do a hibernation. So this physiological changes kind of like are internal. So that's a different adaptation. And then of course behavioral, such as migration. A lot of birds migrate. We also have mammals that migrate. In the East Coast, there's a lot of deer that usually migrate up in north and south, depending on the seasons. Biodiversity is refers to the variety of life in all of its forms. So it's important for ecosystem stability, resilience, and human well-being. Biodiversity, in a nutshell, is just making sure that we don't have one single thing, like a lot of one single thing, right? So, and y'all might be asking, well, how can this like also transfer to human well-being? The example I like to give is ragweed, right? So a lot of people are allergic to ragweed. If we had just a monocrop of ragweed, we would all be like dying with allergies, right? So, and that's just kind of like on the human aspect of things. But of course, having one single thing of one, a lot of one single thing is never good. So there is three levels of biodiversity. There's genetic diversity, which is variation within a species. There is species diversity, which is how many different species there is in one area, and ecosystem diversity, which is the variety of those ecosystems in a specific region. So, good example of that is okay, we can go to a ranch, right? Let's say there's a river on one of the edges, and then there's just pastures. So in there, we can see that there's going to be like a prairie ecosystem, bottom hardwood forest in one section, and then riparian, and then we have the river as a different ecosystem. So all these kind of interact with each other as well. And the loss of any of these at any level can really disrupt ecological balances. So, habitat requirements of live wildlife. This translates a lot back to what we were talking earlier. Each different species has different specific habitat preferences. Understanding these will also help us in conservation and land management, and to help protect both the species and the ecosystems. So, one of the main things that we need to look about when we're talking about habitat, it's carrying capacity. Carrying capacity refers to two different things, and biological carrying capacity is the maximum population an environment is able to support, right? So we can think about this in very simple terms. Let's say we have a pen, and it's just a pasture. Well, in that pasture, how many cows can we put before we run out of grass, right? And then we have cultural carrying capacity, which is the population level acceptable to humans. So this is very not necessarily controversial, but it's one of those things that we need to take into consideration. So, for example, let's say we have too many deer in one area, but that's starting to cause a lot of traffic accidents, stuff like that. So then we need to like look at assessing those populations and maybe diminish them or figure out a better strategy for that. So land use conflicts arise when human needs clash with wildlife habitat needs, right? That's something that we've always seen. Um, as we develop into these wooded areas, we start sharing more habitat with wildlife, and we start seeing that clash in between. So that's where that cultural carrying capacity really comes into show, right? We all heard about like raccoons living on people's attics, deer just randomly showing up on people's backyards. So that's kind of like that wildlife and human interaction that changes carrying capacity options. So for wildlife management practices, we have a lot of different techniques. We do habitat restoration that include controlled burns, population monitoring, and regulation of hunting. And all these methods aim to basically maintain a healthy wildlife ecosystem and wildlife population. Um, this practices kind of go linking back to the beginning to we are trying to like keep that biodiversity high, right? A lot of like, for example, the controlled burns. A lot of our ecosystems here in Texas are very fire dependent before they become monocrop. So by us doing those controlled burns, we're increasing that biodiversity, which in succession allows for more species to have that food, to have that shelter, to have that water, and everything available. So there is the role as wildlife agencies. There is federal, state, and provincial agencies, and basically we just manage and protect wildlife as needed. We enforce laws, conduct research, and provide the education and outreach to kind of like inform. And I think this is important because people usually fear the unknown. So if we're not able to educate and like really explain to people why we're doing the things that we do, they're not gonna they're gonna be against it sometimes, right? So I know a lot of people are against controlled burns, but once you explain to them like, oh, you know what, this is so that it's not just full of ragweed or full of this invasive grasses, so that we can create better spaces, open spaces. They tend to understand that. Or hunting, right? A lot of people are like, oh, don't kill Bambi, but too many Bambis are gonna decimate the plant populations, and eventually, I'm like, what's better, like for us to control them or for them to starve to death, right? Things like that. We do have hunter education programs. Texas has a mandatory hunter education program. Of course, this is, I think it's for anybody that was born after 1970, if I'm not mistaken. It's mandatory. If you buy a hunting license, you need to take the hunter education course. If game wardens catch you with no hunter education course, you get a hefty fine. And you just need to make sure it is a 7-hour course. You can take it online. We have in-person options, and basically it promotes safety, ethics, and conservation awareness amongst hunters. Right? We're trying to create ethical and conscious people to help us manage the populations of wildlife in Texas. So, invasive species and biodiversity. Non native invasive species can outcompete native species and degrade habitats. Invasive plants alter ecosystems and reduce habitat quality for wildlife. And I think this presentation might have gotten all scrambled up, so I apologize. Land use and wildlife. So, the way we use each plot of land really affects the way that wildlife are going to interact with it. We keep on losing a lot of habitat due to fragmentation. As we drive down the highway, we see it. We'll see a plot of land that is a ranch, then a big neighborhood, then a little bit of a forest, then another subdivision and stuff like that. So that fragmentation really affects the population dynamics and how all these ecosystems used to interact with each other. Because now we're adding, from those subdivisions, extra watershed to a local creek, right? Or the that interface between prairie and what used to be forest or what is forest, that middle section is gone. So now we lost the full ecosystem in that section. And animals need to adapt. So like it says here, environment degradation increases pressure on wildlife resources. Now, wildlife diseases. Wildlife, just like us, can be affected by microbes, parasites, toxins, and other agents. So this is something else that we do a lot here with Texas Parks and Wildlife. We monitor and manage disease, and this is all crucial for wildlife health. And I have this slide of some of the more common diseases that we can encounter. Some bacterial diseases include tuberculosis, brucellosis, salmonellosis. These are very common. Well, they are preventable for livestock, but they are also common on like wildlife and pets, right? Viral diseases is rabies. One of those that we are all very familiar with, canine distemper. We all vaccinate our puppies as soon as we can for that, and avian influenza. That's really been, I mean, we've heard it on the news. We've had that egg shortage, we've had that chicken shortage, and that's the reason. Birds can get the flu too, and it's seasonal for the most part. It also it gets if there is you know a bird that comes into contact with it and it's migrating, it can spread it, right? So it's one of those things that we just need to keep an eye on. Parasitic disease, it can be like lungworms, heartworms, bot flies infestations. We are currently something that like just popped up recently. It's the New World screwworm. That's a parasitic infection. Thankfully, there have not been any cases reported in Texas yet, but we're doing everything to monitor and make sure that it doesn't become an issue. So that is something that animals that need to deal with. Of course, wildlife don't get the availability of having a vet on call, right? Like our pets do. But a lot of these animals just have like developed adaptations to live with them. Fungal diseases, we got white nose syndrome that really affects bats. That's one of the things that has been decimating bat populations in Texas and in Mexico. And I can never pronounce that one. But it's basically an amphibian disease. It kills frogs and salamanders, and but it depends on like it's very environment dependent. So that's when like really like us changing the ecosystems really affect that situation. And then other notable diseases. I'm pretty sure everybody has been hearing about CWD, right? The zombie deer, prions disease. It affects only ungulates, so deer, elk, pronghorn sheep, or pronghorn deer, whatever you want to call it, and mule deer. But what in our case, what are we doing? Every single deer that gets harvested at a state facility gets tested for it. So that's kind of like one of the examples of what we're doing. West Nile virus, that's something that it affects humans, but it also affects horses, birds. So, just kind of like those control of like insects and other vectors really comes into play.
So you said that you monitor and manage. So yeah, give me an example of like managing something like that because it's wildlife.
So when we like a good example of chronic wasting disease, for example, is if we get a report of anything that is we may think that is chronic wasting disease, we make sure to euthanize that animal and test it just to be to any preventive measures. The other way we manage for that is have really controlled measures of deer transportation. So for all the deer breeders, and we have like really specific rules that they need to follow if they want to move deer from one county to another, from one state to another. And another thing is, in case people are not testing their deer or for any reason, we do have disposal like guidelines that they need to follow just to prevent that spread. So that's kind of like how we would manage things like that. Then West Nile virus, you know, a lot of counties, a lot of cities do uh, pesticide applications. They spray for mosquitoes to control the mosquito population. That decreases the options of that disease spreading. And canine distemper, the way we manage it is by vaccinating our dogs at an early age. That way we can prevent them from getting it and spreading it. So,
is chronic wasting a huge problem in Texas? I'm from Arkansas. It's decimating ours.
thankfully, no. I think like in total we may have had about 5 cases, confirmed cases.
I've seen deer just walk down the highway right into your car.
Yeah. So thankfully, we haven't had that big of an issue. We at Six Parks and Wildlife, we stay on top of it, and I'm sure y'all have seen there is backlash for that, but we are trying to make sure that what we do and what the rules that we implement are just to make sure that we can preserve the populations and prevent us from having that situation, right? Besides chronic wasting disease, we also have what is it? EHD, ectozoonic hemorrhagic disease, which is another very common disease on hoofed animals, and it's very similar. So EHD has been a little bit more prominent in Texas than CWD, but not to the point that we are super concerned about it. Yes.
Can you explain chronic wasting disease a little bit?
Sure. So chronic wasting disease is a prion disease. What it is that it affects their nervous system. So it transfers through saliva. So if a deer has drank water or eaten a certain spot and it's an infected deer, it can leave its saliva traces. Then another deer comes by and either like drinks the same water source or eats the grass that was next to the infected saliva. They can get it, and basically, I don't remember the inoculation time, but it's fairly quick to where it like just takes root on the nervous central system, and like we've like the common name says, they become zombies, right? They're not afraid of humans anymore. They're not afraid of vehicles. They just like walk single mindedly towards one location, and sometimes they're just walking in circles. Uh, a lot of times, I don't know, they have not confirmed if it's this is due to the prion or not, but a lot of times they just walk into water. So yeah, crossing ways, it's mostly in the nervous system. So we have not confirmed that if anybody eats like meat that is not has not been in contact with spinal fluid or cerebral cortex and stuff like that, that it would be infected. But we can never be too careful, right? So we always recommend people to dispose if we do have a positive for the testing. The way that we test, we do take the lymph nodes that are right behind their jaw, so or a piece of their cerebral cortex, and that's the testing that we do. We have a lab in College Station that does all our testing. They get a lot of samples every day. Yeah. And like I said, it mostly affects ungulates, so deer, elk, moose. There has not been any case that reported that it'll affect any type of livestock, but better safe than sorry, right? So from there, we go to threatened and endangered species. We use a lot of like all these terms to refer to different species that have been threatened or endangered. There is also that are not listed here, but we use at risk, we use stable or least concern, right? So those are the ones that are not necessarily too much of an issue, but we have extinct, extirpated, endangered, threatened, candidate species, which means that they're under consideration to be in the list, and then reintroduction. So they're restored species. So extirpated, we can talk about, for example, the red wolf, right? It's been extirpated from Texas. There is still other populations with the Texas genetic in other parts. They were moved to North Carolina and Florida, but it's no longer here, right? Endangered, we have a couple of endangered species, and here. Y'all need me to go back? All right, I'll hold for this. But there is a good amount of endangered species in Texas. There is a website with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services that you can definitely. We use it as a tool for research and the work that we do, but it's accessible for everybody. And you can really look at the list of possible threatened or endangered species in your county just by inputting your location. So I think that is a pretty cool tool that everybody can use, just in case you want to do some work on your backyard. Doesn't hurt to know if there's something that you might need to take care of. Y'all let me know when I can change it. Good? Alrighty. So what characterizes an endangered species? It's basically the species has a small population, has limited ranges, and or it has specialized habitat needs. So some of these examples include the whooping crane, black rails, and the Houston toads. So with the Houston toads, we have a very small population with a limited range, right? And has a specialized habitat needs. So that one has all three. Um, what are the needs? Like habitat needs, they need like really sandy ponds, and that a lot of those ponds have been destroyed due to the construction of like cities. But it's one of those things. Black rail for also, they they do like marshes, and their habitat is really fire dependent. So with us like not burning as often as we should or could, that has like decreased habitat availability. So it's one of those that we need to manage for. With this, the Endangered Species Act protects species at risk of extinction. There's agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, TPWD, sites, and IUCN. Um, we kind of like make sure that we're listing protecting species at a global, federal, and state levels. So these are just examples of the agencies that y'all might want to write down. All right, and this is where I said it got scrambled, my part presentation. So invasive species, there's not only wildlife, but also vegetation. Invasive vegetation, they disrupt native ecosystems. We have the issue that oftentimes invasive wildlife tends to outcompete native species for habitat, food. They spread diseases that they have become kind of immune to. And of course, they lack natural predators, allowing their populations to grow unchecked. Um, we do have those pamphlets. I recommend everybody pick them up. They're kind of really fun to read. Also, what makes an invasive species so prominent is that they tend to have like really high adaptability, and reproductive rates tend to be off the charts. So, for example, pigs, right? Wild hogs, they can breed like think like 3 times a year, and they'll have litters of like anywhere from 6 to 20 piglets. So y'all can only imagine, right? So based on a study done by Texas A&M, they say that in order for you to maintain a population stable, right, in a 100-acre plot of land, you need to harvest at least 100 pigs a year, and that's just to maintain it stable, right? Not to reduce it. So all of the state land has management programs for pigs. We do it through trapping, hunting, etc. Invasive plant species can definitely dominate the landscape. We all know KR bluestem, Chinese tallow. The way that these plants dominate the landscapes, they alter soil chemistry, displace native vegetation. They outgrow all the other native vegetation because they tend to just grow at a faster rate, and they produce, once again, reproductive rate is high, so they produce a lot of seed. And yeah, together, like it says here, together these invaders threaten biodiversity, degrade ecosystem health, and interfere with natural ecological processes. So we're going back to being that monocrop, right? that we talked about earlier. Once KR blue stem is in a section, everything becomes KR, or everything becomes Chinese tallow. So it is very important for us to kind of take care of that. And then something that I was told that I needed to touch base on was dental formulas. Y'all know what the dental formulas are? Need a review? Alrighty. So dental formulas refers to the number of each type of tooth, incisors, canine, premolars, and molars, found on one quadrant of an animal's mouth. This can be used to determine the species and dietary strategy used by that animal. So just picture like a face, right? So it's gonna be one quadrant. What we do is we usually tend to stay on one side of the face, and we use the upper quadrant and lower quadrant. So we start by counting the teeth on the upper and lower jaw, only on the left side of the skull. And all upper and lower jaw counts, then multiply by 2, right? Because there's another side of the face. And together, that's the total number of teeth. Shape, size, and number of teeth, they really play a part on what type of species they are. And it's fairly simple once you get familiar with it to kind of be able to guess what species it is just from that. As you can tell here, let me just grab this real quick. So we would start at the top jaw. We have the incisors in front of the canine, premolars. You can see they're all the same shape, and then the molars. What I like to say is that the molars tend to have like 3 or 4 cusps. So if you see them from above, they'll have like 4 points, while the premolars will be kind of like more flattened and just kind of think of a knife just to kind of cut. So it's more like it'll have like 2 cusps or 3, but it's kind of flat. Then on the lower jaw, we have the incisors, which are the front. Everything in front of the canine is considered an incisor. Behind the canine, we have the molars. Molars are typically distinguished by having 1 or 2 cusps, right? Except in this case, this one has a 4th premolar with a 3rd cusp, but that's a very specific case. And then molars tend to be flattened at the top and more for crushing, right? So premolars are going to be kind of like for cutting, and these ones are going to be more for like chewing, right? So the way that we would count is you start with the incisors from the front. Remember, we're doing quadrants. So we're going to do 1, 2, 3 for the incisors, then 1 canine, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 for the premolars, then 2 molars on the top jaw. Then in the bottom jaw, we have 3 incisors, 1 canine, 4 premolars, and 3 molars. So I'll show you kind of like how we like a table form of this, and you would add all these and these, the top and the bottom on each category, and then multiply it by 2, and that gives you the total number of teeth. For example, for a dog, we have 3 incisors at the top, 3 incisors at the bottom. We have 1 canine at the top, 1 canine at the bottom, 4 premolars at the top, 4 premolars at the bottom, and then 2 molars on the top and 3 molars on the bottom. Now, 42 teeth total. With the mouse, we have 1 incisor, right? Because we're just doing 1 quadrant. 1 on the top, 1 on the bottom. No canines, no premolars, and 3 molars both on the top and the bottom. That gives us 16 teeth. Raccoons have 3 incisors, both top and bottom. 1 canine, both top and bottom. 4 premolars, both top and the bottom, and then 2 molars, both top and bottom. This is one of those cases that one of the premolars looks a little bit like a molar on the bottom jaw. So this raccoon is one to keep an eye for, and it's total 40 teeth. And I just included this one because I think it's fun. The elephant, it just has 1 incisor, which is the tusk, right? Then no canines, no premolars, and then 3 molars, both on the top and the bottom. So if you see this really can tell us kind of like the diet of each animal, right? what do we see? We see if we see canines and premolars, which are those teeth meant for cutting, probably means that it's like taking chunks out of something, right? Taking chunks out of like probably meat, right? So the dog is carnivore, has premolars, and it has canine for like kind of like hunting and hooking. Raccoon, we know it's an omnivore, mostly carnivore, so it has those premolars for cutting. While the mouse and the elephant, they don't have a need for canines or premolars, right? One exception for this is deer. There has been reported, well, there's a species of deer, of course, that has the, I think it's called the moonjack, that has the little kind of fangs. They call them vampire deer. And white-tailed deer, actually, there is some that will want, it won't show over the gum, but once you get the skull, they'll sometimes have a vestigial canine. So, questions on dental formulas?
I do a lab where they dissect an owl pellet, and we have to look for the mice. It's mostly mice and shrew, and I try to teach the difference between what is the shrew teeth like. They look really weird. I don't. Is that different than this? Would that not be on one of these?
They do have their own dental formula,
Okay.
but yeah, they have like special, like different specialized teeth because they don't. They're so each species and family, genera, and stuff like that will have like different tooth formula, and that's why it's kind of like once you're able to like get to do it, you're able to kind of identify the species itself. And so I have this, and I'm gonna show you. So this is the presentation that I gave the students this year. It was fully on Texas wildlife. We talked about birds, mammals, insects, reptiles, amphibians, and invasive wildlife. Just so y'all get an idea, explain kind of what a bird is. I went into specifics about a couple of different species. This is I try to include a threatened or endangered species on each section, just so that they would know or have an idea. So, Atwater Prairie Chicken Refuge, it's one of those critically endangered species that we have in Texas. There is reintroduction site close by, so that's fun. And I include barred owl, snowy egret, roseate spoonbill, and these are just kind of like different examples that I thought would be fun, right, for Texas. With the mammals, ocelot, that's one of those endangered species. There is a reintroduction site down by the King's Ranch. They are actually creating a new facility for reproduction of ocelots. And then we touched base on like some of the more common ones: Mexican free-tailed bat, white-tailed deer. My favorite Texas mammal, the ring-tailed cat, which is not a cat, by the way. For insects, I don't think we quite have an endangered species for insects, or listed at least, but stag beetle. Technically, this is the range for it, but I've yet to see one in the wild myself. Monarch butterflies, carpenter bee, sphinx moth. Then I went into reptiles and amphibians. We were doing it around this area, so I went specific with Harris County. Of course, not all the reptiles here are the Harris County, but Texas horned lizard. This is also, I believe, threatened, not endangered. One of the most famous reptiles of Texas, right? Alligator snapping turtle. Then we have this endangered species, which is the Houston toad, often confused with the Gulf Coast toad. So, Gulf Coast toad is the one that we see every time it rains outside in our backyard. That's that guy, probably, not the Houston toad. Then alligators, we have plenty of those here. Alligators will be U-shaped. They have like a more rounded snout, and then crocodiles will be V-shaped for the most part. And then teeth arrangement, alligators, as you can see, like you'll see mostly just the top teeth, and then maybe one or two of the bottom teeth. while crocodiles, you will see all of the teeth up and down, like outside of their mouth. Then I touch base on invasive species for them as well. Talked about feral hogs, nutria. These have been like very like responsible of basically pushing out a lot of our muskrat populations here in Texas. We used to have a very large muskrat population in the coast towards south of Beaumont and even in this area of Houston. But nutria have took over the whole environment, so that was sad. European starlings, that's one of like the most prominent invasive species all over the US. And I always like putting this fun fact in there because all European starlings in the US are descendants for the original 100 that were released in North Central Park for a Shakespeare play. That's crazy, right? One simple thing, he just wanted to see the birds that Shakespeare was seeing, and he created a, a countrywide epidemic. Apple snails are also a very common invasive species here. Those eggs, they're pink for a reason. Don't touch them. They have neurotoxins, so it's not good for you. And then I did a whole list of other invasive species.
I've read a lot about the lionfish problem.
Oh yeah, lionfish. We have an issue of that. That of course started with the aquarium trade. People started like releasing their fish or flushing them, and they ended up in the Gulf. Florida has terrible issue with lionfish. I've heard a lot of like the coastal restaurants in Florida. If you bring the lionfish, they'll make fish tacos for you for free. So it's a good way to like get people to go out there and get them, right? And a lot of these invasive species too have like been introduced, like this guy right here, this guy right here, this guy's right here. They were introduced for the sport of hunting, right? But of course, we cannot always control where animals stay or go or what they want to do. So that's how things start. They start as something like, oh, we're gonna have so much fun with it, and then it gets out of control. Grass carp, right? We got them here. We thought that all of them were the ones that we produced were uh, what's called couldn't mate, right? So they got out and they started mating. We brought them out here just to control like algae and all the invasive plants that were popping up on the lakes, and we ended up with a different issue. Then I went into dental formulas with them as well, showed them basically the same pictures and the data as y'all, and then that was basically my presentation for them. So here's my information. Feel free to reach out. I do participate a lot on Skype a Scientist. So if y'all participate on that, we might be able to link that way as well. Feel free to email me or call me as you need. But yeah, do y'all have any questions, concerns, ideas?
What's the one thing that y'all fight the most as far as invasives?
KR bluestem. Yeah, grass. So KR bluestem is one of those that we call the old world bluestem. So KR bluestem, Angleton bluestem. Those are very kind of like high seed producing monocropic grasses that just outgrow everything. But yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things here in like the Houston area. Tallow trees. It's a constant battle. Vegetation, surprisingly, plants are the one thing that we fight the most, followed, of course, by feral hogs. And
Care blue stem. It grows like crazy.
it does grow like crazy. So the best way to kill it, either cut it or burn it when it's in flower. Because, what we know of invasive species is that they put all their energy for that reproduction, right? They want to produce as much seed as they can. They want to produce as much flower as they can. So they're putting all that energy towards flower production. and seed production. So if you hit them hard when it's that time, like it tends to not be able to recover. Yeah. Also with tallow trees, whenever they're like in bloom, like a lot of people say like, oh, you need to spray herbicide, but I've been able to kill trees just by girdling them without any spray when they're in bloom. Hmm. So when you girdle so trees, the way trees are formed is like they start growing outwards, right? So, but usually the one layer that controls all the water and nutrient movement is on the outermost section, so the cambium. If you go in deep enough and start like cutting that bark all around to where you sever that cambium, it stops the nutrient transfer from the bottom all the way to the top. So that's why a lot of our trees, when they keep those straps around them, when they're planted to like kind of keep them up, they end up kind of choking them. They call it choking themselves. It's because that cambium gets constricted. Or if they have root bound, a lot of times when the tree outgrows the root ball, sometimes they'll choke themselves with that root. So we're kind of like artificially doing that by severing it ourselves. And it does not work with every single species because there is some species that don't necessarily just have the cambium. They have like the full trunk carries the nutrients, but
So when you cut it around in a circle, or
yeah. So you just cut kind of like a strip all around, and a lot of people like spraying the herbicide there. It makes it easier because it's already there and it's getting absorbed. That definitely will guarantee that the elimination, but yeah, then it's an easy way to kind of like get rid of like the bigger trees, especially. Thank you.
and if you could show your appreciation.
Really appreciate it. I appreciate what y'all are doing for the youth. So at least I can take it.